Wow. Well, kia ora, good morning, good evening, good day, wherever you are. That was kind of a fun intro for us behind the scenes. And welcome to this presentation, our little soapbox talk on expedition leading in the modern era. And I'm very, very fortunate to have with me three of the best, no pressure team, but welcome one and all.
Cheers, thanks, Ben.
So joining us today, we have Flo, Laurie and Solan scattered all over the globe, and I'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves in just a moment. But up first, I really just want to thank the Polar Tourism Guides Association for giving us an opportunity to gather. And hopefully some of you have been tuning into some of the other presentations so far. I think we're all missing seeing one another, and we have our fingers crossed that we'll be seeing each other in a port or on the AIS or maybe even over the VHF sometime soon. But in the interim, this is what we've got, and it's actually fantastic. So good morning all. Flo, why don't we start with you? Are you able to give us a little bit of who you are, where you are, and a good evening, I suppose?
Yes, exactly. That was what I was going to say. Good evening, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm in rainy Netherlands, unfortunately. I would have loved to be in the north, but like all of us, I think we just have to do it with this. I'm working for a couple of companies as an EL normally, and based in the Netherlands. So English is not my native language, you'll hear that.
Well, thanks, Flo. Laurie, where are you?
I'm just down the road from you, Ben, a long road in the South Island of New Zealand at the moment, at a friend's house. So this it looks like an EL office here, but it's not mine. And just living in New Zealand at the moment, but I'm Canadian by nature, as you'll hear in my accent. And I've been with Quark for about 8 years now. So I've been working pretty exclusively with that one company, and that's kind of the hat that I'll take to this meeting, as someone else on the call might as well. But looking forward to hearing insight from the others on this panel.
Perfect. Thanks, Laurie. And greetings from a dark New Zealand. Solan.
Good morning from Alaska. My name is Solan Jensen, and worked for a few different companies over the years in the polar regions, and currently with Quark Expeditions as an expedition leader. And just so many people come to mind that on whose shoulders we are now able to do this work. And I'm excited to have this conversation and piece some of that apart.
Perfect. It looks a little sunnier in Alaska than it does here.
Unusually so. Yeah, we're in the middle of a rainforest here, and today is one of the rare days we've got some blue sky on our hands.
Oh, good man. We're an hour away from sunrise, give or take here, so let the sun rain down. And then my name's Ben Jackson. I too am an expedition leader and have worked for various companies also. I've been in the polar regions for about 10 years, and then I'm also a co-founder of the Expedition Guide Academy, which I'm immensely proud of. So if you've tuned in already to one of these, you'll realize that you have the opportunity to kind of use the Facebook chat function and write questions that you'd like to be asked. We have Lauren, who's busy behind the scenes conducting all of this, so she'll be able to send the questions through. So certainly don't hesitate with that, and we'll probably look at getting to some of these questions later in the piece. But to kick things off, let's go hard and fast and get into it. I'm pretty keen to talk to each of you or hear from each of you about your basic philosophy to expedition leading, and how you approach life on board. Solan, you've got a knowing nod there. Do you care to take the lead?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, it's the coffee coursing through my veins. I have a couple of things to say about this. One of the first ones is that the environment is the star. I'm always thinking about that, of this idea that even though, oftentimes as the EL, you're up in front speaking, receiving energy from people and interacting constantly, but we're there really as conduits in my mind. the wildlife, the environment, and experiencing that is really the priority. And I think approaching that with the goals of non-disturbance and minimizing our impact, but also trying to provide an undistracted experience. We might get into this in one of our later questions, but I find that the question of people's distracted attention is becoming more and more evident in their traveling and witnessing and observing, and just patience and ability to take in their surroundings. So those are big ones. And then one that I also take from you and others is this idea that our teams really come first, and prioritizing our support of our team so that they can really do their best work. And I think the centerpiece to that is really trust. And the way that that's built is super complex, of course. You could talk a lot about that. And then maybe the last thing I'll say, without risk of overhogging, is that I think that I have kind of a mystical spiritual relationship with being outside, and I can't help but let that sort of bubble out in the way that I approach leading. And so I try to be as light-handed as possible, but I really wish for people to leave their experience with a sense of reverence. And I think that idea of reverence as we conduct ourselves is probably like the centerpiece. If I had an ethic, that would be it.
Oh, some fantastic insights.
Boom, microphone drop.
Yeah, we can get the proverbial microphone going. I'm going to skip across the Northern Hemisphere to Flo.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, Solan. To me, I would say that it's the experience that I really, really think it's so important to be able to give people this experience in nature, where nature is indeed the hero of it all, and also respect for nature. That's a thing that for me is really important. We always insist on it on board, but I feel that we really need to continue to do so. So respect for nature, but yeah, giving people the experience as much as possible. And I think it is very special if they really feel it. We can talk about everything, we can show films and documentaries, but to be out there and to let them really experience it themselves, that is the main thing. And for me, the team is also sacred. I think the team we're working with, that is such a privilege to work with people that are so driven and self-responsible and passionate and knowledgeable, and who want to share all that. So that is also, in my philosophy, really important, and to keep the team healthy.
Cool, thanks for that, Flo. Laurie, any thoughts on this?
Being third, I just get to tail on to what they've said already. So thanks, guys, for answering this so eloquently. I think in adding to sort of the respect for the place and wanting people to get the most out of the experiences, it's pretty important to me to sometimes things can become over-programmed and there's schedules to keep, and you're working with other ships, other operators, and trying to stick to a timeline and objective. And it's important to still be fluid in all of that and to take advantage of opportunities that arise. And I do think that is becoming more challenging sometimes, and we can possibly talk about that later. But I think trying to keep that flexibility in place is really important when taking advantage of the environment around and whatever may come, being able to change your plans. And that's where a really strong team comes into play. And I think team is probably at the forefront for all of us. I think that perhaps traditionally people might have thought of leading as having a team sort of in service to you, and I flip it around and say leading is in service to the team, and trying to set up an environment where people can really thrive and show initiative and take on new challenges. And that team is a pretty special thing. So hearing you chat about seeing each other on AIS or VHF brings that all back to the fore.
Oh, fantastic. So I'm just going to pick up on a bit of a theme that you've all touched on there. So the whole the experience with nature and, and the guest experience being forefront there, have you found, and I'm thinking probably particularly the peninsula, have you found that there are challenges in being able to deliver that experience for our guests as we see, increased visitation down there? Or is this a challenge that's, always been in place on the peninsula and in Svalbard?
You want me to?
Take it away, Flo.
I think it's becoming more and more challenging simply because there's two big reasons. Ships are getting bigger, more passengers. So that is one of the things. And then there's more ships. So of course it's, and there's a third one. I think there's also the tendency of having more and more activities on board. So that also adds to something. And to be honest, I'm more of the less is more school. I think the experience for me is leading because it's very strong. And as Solan said, maybe that is a bit spiritual, but I think that is what is really, really important. But I find those the biggest challenges. The more ships, more people, more activities. And sometimes you get so entangled with all these logistics and another ships and all these things going on that and also the choice threats of passengers, that it is sometimes difficult to bring them back to this experience of this amazing nature.
Cool, thanks for that, Flo. Laurie?
Yeah, I really appreciate what you've said there, Flo, and I think I agree that sometimes more ships and is probably the biggest thing. It means less opportunity sometimes to be flexible if weather is changing or you have a wildlife experience that you want to spend more time with, but then that you need, there's a key site, continental landing, that is a really important one for so many people. That sort of stuff that you have different objectives that you've sort of got to achieve, and you have to always balance those as EL and thinking about what things you may give up or what to prioritize. I think there's a perception that sometimes large and more operations takes us away from the experience. And I can certainly understand why it would appear that way. If you've got all these different activities, is it really about just being quiet and still and enjoying the place? And the thing that I've noticed is working on a ship with lots of different activities, from stand-up paddleboarding and 2 kayak programs and skiing and mountaineering. A real driver behind that was to give people different avenues to explore in a way that was meaningful to them, but getting people out in small groups. So taking a 200 passenger ship and trying to divide that up and allow people to have those more intimate experiences in the environment. So I think that's maybe a perception that a lot of people can have, that the more stuff that's going on you can get kind of lost in, but in another way it does enhance the experience as well.
Oh, great.
And sorry, Ben. Yeah, I was just going to say, and there's that way in which, particularly as you say, the Antarctic Peninsula and Svalbard and perhaps a couple other locations are heavily visited enough, relatively speaking, that we have this kind of hyper organization around our scheduling. And that is such a central feature to those areas in the way that we can run our trips. And it's not the case everywhere in the polar regions either. And so I think about that relationship in terms of a challenge that we face now with the massive explosion of just media in general and social media in particular, such that so many people are coming with so much already intact in their mind's eye about what it should look like or what they want, that I find one of the biggest challenges right now is to kind of disabuse people of that material detritus that they've picked up from media, and just to like clear the slate a little bit, to be like, this is actually your experience, whatever is happening here today, and this is what you need to focus on and absorb as much as possible, and kind of try to like brush the expectation side aside. despite this just huge amount of information that comes flowing at us. So that's the ongoing challenge that I see as well for us.
Also, I guess you've kind of touched on something that I was thinking about already, Solan, and that is like, how has your role as an expedition leader, and this is collective here, changed since you've been in industry, and perhaps you have perceptions of what ELN was like before you entered the industry? Like, has it changed? Are the expectations different in our role? Have we had to evolve, or are our companies changing? It's kind of a broad sweeping question there.
Yeah, I mean, just to continue on that riff for a second, and I'll relate this to a question I also see coming to us, which is, I couldn't agree with more, which is this idea that to be a good leader, you also need to be very in touch with the front lines of what's happening in your operations. And so to continue guiding, as it were, even as we are, as our demands on us as expedition leaders sometimes takes us farther away from those front lines, if you will, that it's really important to make sure that you're still involved in that way, whether that's not taking all of your contracts as being EL and guiding for some of your contracts so that you can still see kind of the material of what's happening on the front lines constantly. And I see that as being one of the changes as well. Over the last number of years, there was a time when there wasn't so much pressure on particularly external communications. I find that takes up a lot of my time, along with logistical organization. And it seemed more like expedition leading was, pick up the microphone and give people a briefing, but then we'd all go out and be guiding all day long or whatever, and come back and make some decisions with the captain. But the expanse of that administratively of the EL role has just changed so dramatically. Maybe I'll pass the baton off there.
Flo or Laurie, any comment to the evolution of our roles as expedition leader?
Yeah, I think Solan already said it, but I think expectations of passengers have changed. I feel that I'm not around that long, for 10 years or something, but that people came and were immediately happy with what was going to happen. Internet was not good, so they disconnected. And I think that was actually really great, to be disconnected and to be completely there. And whereas nowadays they whatever they do, they want to tell their grandchildren while on the phone, on WhatsApp phone or whatever, and they get frustrated because it doesn't work. That's one thing. And the other thing is that, often they feel they're going to live the real David Attenborough documentary, and then that's the expectation and not so much what's happening there. So the first polar bear, it's too far away because there needs to be a kill just next to the ship. And I think that is to get people just back there to experience what is happening and to appreciate that. I think that has become a bit of more of a challenge. And because it's all busier, there's more rules, there's more logistics, all of that. I think, sometimes I think it's less adventurous, maybe because of all the rules, but they make sense as well. So I don't want to destroy them at all. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess Solan and also Flo, you've spoken to a question that we've had come in from Gerard. Apologies if I'm saying that incorrectly. And that was about, do the panelists feel it's important to not just be always in EL, but a guide as well, so they see both sides of the operations? And, I'll take the opportunity to speak to that a little bit as well. I often feel I'm most disconnected from guests when I go down the rabbit hole of ELN and logistics and trying to optimize the day. When I look around later on in a voyage, then I realize that there are people that I haven't seen before or I haven't spoken to. So I think I really do appreciate and enjoy my period when I'm not expedition leading as well. So you can take the time pause and talk with people and have that connection. So we've had another question come in on, you know, how do ELs, expedition leaders, balance, you know, field operations in the day-to-day with the demands back in, you know, the office from the expedition company. So are there any strategies that you're employing as an EL to balance that back-end demand, you know, from the office? Are you more accountable? You know, are there more comms with the office? Laurie, you're working on some big ships and big operations. Is that something that you are mindful about trying to balance?
I am, and I think I feel grateful to work for an operation that's pretty understanding when I'm not as immediately responsive. I think I feel that there's an understanding that the immediate is the people that you're dealing with on board the ship, and you're responsible for communicating out to a lot of guests. I think the most times that I felt there's been more need for urgent communication with the office is, you know, during emergent times. I've had a couple of medevacs, and most recently there was a COVID experience that some might have read about. And I will say that some things like, you know, talking about the changing nature of ELing over time, I think the technology, it has been really helpful in the communication that we have accessible with the office. So, you know, being able to message someone over WhatsApp really quickly and get an immediate response, or email or calls. You know, it used to be a sat call that was dropping out sometimes, and it's challenging to get messages across when that's your only medium for communication. So I think that technology has made that connection easier. It definitely can split your time a little bit. I know what Solan means, and sometimes there's, you know, the nature of comms is such that you could have a passenger complaining to an agent back home to complain to our office for it to come back to you, and you think this is crazy. It could have been dealt with really easily on board. So that's the sort of thing that I think has probably shifted a little bit. And I just kind of am quickly tailing back onto the end of the previous question. Sorry, Ben, but I did want to add some of the changes have been really beneficial. Like when you think about weather forecasting, and it's far more precise and localized than, you know, probably accessible 10 years ago before I was ever working in the industry. So that's been massively helpful. But you have that information, so does every other EL. So everyone's, you know, possibly looking to change and to do similar things. And guests also have information. So whatever you're telling the guests, they're going to be reading about and trying to provide suggestions of their own sometimes. So that's all quite interesting. But I think the weather forecasting and then stuff like IATO scheduler, in the past, it was an Excel spreadsheet being sent around. And if somebody made a change, you're going back into a massive table to switch it around, and there's room for human error. So the last few years, IATO putting a big effort in to get their scheduling system live. And now as ELs, we can kind of look at a map and see where their ships are. And if somebody changes a site, it's uploaded automatically and not at the response of the EL. So some significant tech advances that have been really beneficial to us, as well as challenging for all the reasons people have previously hit on.
Yeah, that has been a quantum leap, the whole live scheduling from IATO. I certainly know that I did not enjoy the 20 to 30 emails a day that I was having to filter through to try and figure out where people were at. So props to IATO for that one. And then it is nice also, you know, not having a grid weather file of the entire Southern Ocean and trying to figure out what it's going to be like south of the Le Maire. Thank you very much, Wendy. A question that I'm very keen to ask, and it's also something that's filtered in a lot already, is why comparatively we have so few female expedition leaders. Laurie, Flo, experts in the area, female expedition leading. What are your thoughts on that? Flo, why don't we hand the mic over to you?
Oh yeah, why? I think it's changing, to be honest, because you see also when I started, teams were often almost only men and just a couple of women. I think that is really changing, and therefore you also see more and more female expedition leaders. But I think it's just traditionally the whole sailing business is quite male dominated. Like, for example, bridges. I don't know how it is on your ships, but the ships I'm working on, it's 90+% men working there. There's hardly any women there. And the other thing also sometimes, and this is not why there are so few women, but sometimes passengers, especially male passengers from a certain generation, they tend to appreciate more the wild, adventurous polar Indiana Jones sort of men. I think because they can tell those stories when they go back home. But then when you have a very nice lady leading, that is a different story. Then it feels different to them. I have had that on ships, that men were quite hostile, where their wives were just so happy to see female leadership. And to be honest, I'm totally unaware of it. I just do my job, whatever. But I think it's a quite traditional world, and that the bridges, I think they have a couple of decades to move forward. And I also believe that it is shifting, and thank God, because it's also a job where you need to communicate a lot. It's not only about skills and being a tough hero or something. It's very much about transmitting something. And I think in this area, we once had a discussion on board, and actually the members of the team, the male members, they were saying, but it's up to us to say something when there is inequality. So whether it be gay issues, women, whatever, there's other things. But it's up to the others, to all of us, to address those issues, I think, and to change it a bit. So I hope we can do that, and we can move forward really quickly and have more women, more of everything, more diversity on the ships.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a really valid point you've touched on there, Flo, is, it's about the team rallying around in those instances, where the stereotypical middle-aged white man lays down their judgment. I think that's a very valid point that we could all take away as team members. Laurie, what's your experience having come through this? Do you feel like there are fewer, female ELs, and why is this? And are there additional challenges?
Yeah, it was funny. As you're asking that, I guess it's something that hasn't been on my radar as much lately, but when the question is asked, it comes to the forefront of your mind. And the reason it hasn't been on my radar as much is I work with an operator that has now eight expedition leaders, and half of those are female. So when we have meetings and gatherings, it's half male and half female voice. And when you take a moment to think about that, I'm really grateful that that is the case. And I think that just has evolved over time, probably historically, with, just as Flo's mentioned, not as many females in the industry to begin with, to be promoted into different positions. But I definitely see that shifting now. And I think as there are more female leaders, other females see it as a role that's something that they want to achieve themselves. And I think whether it's male or female, a lot of people, including myself, look to expedition leaders, and if there's things about that person or that role that connect with you, you can see yourself in that position. And so, having more females on the team, I've definitely noticed some newer staff coming on and being surprised by how many females there are coming from other outdoor industries and other parts of the world where there are more men in general that they're working with. And so being appreciative of more females. I haven't necessarily noticed too many different challenges, but I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't address the fact that I think, like, with a lot of senior males on bridge teams and things, I do at times feel there's a difference in the relationship that I can have with that leadership versus my male counterparts. Sometimes there's, flirtations or things that can become involved, and it's a really tricky thing that you that I wish wasn't there, but it is. And I think it's worth just mentioning, because I think it's probably something that we should be aware of in the industry. And I'm not insinuating of anything to do with harassment, should that ever occur. That's a totally different level. But I think the difference of noticing, being on a ship with Solan and feeling really comfortable and at ease to go have whiskey in a captain's cabin and chat about the next day's events, or that's something that I don't feel is appropriate for for me. So it's a little bit different in that regard, and that I wish wasn't there. I think if there were more female leadership on the bridge, as Flo's indicated, I think that would shift over time. So yeah, I think, but I have noticed that, if there ever is that case, or, and I had an unfortunate incident of working with a captain that just the only place I would communicate with them was on the bridge. And so you just set those boundaries, but I really appreciated the team also being aware of those things. And I think, lots of people, are noticing stuff like that and being aware and speaking up when it is happening and supporting each other through it. But I think it's something that just, worth touching on there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've certainly seen what I believe to be additional challenges for female staff. I could use the example of driving Zodiacs. There's from the sailors, the ABs on the gangway, there's like an inherent understanding that men will be better drivers than women, and that's often not the case. And so I see women, female colleagues, Penella, my partner, one of them, I've watched time and time again as we move into different ships and different operations. I watch her having to prove herself, whereas the sailors probably don't take a second look at me because they're making assumptions. And I think that probably ties back in with what I think you mentioned earlier, Flo, was being a good team is about supporting staff and being aware of this sort of stuff and being mindful to that. And we could probably spend a lot of time on this, but I'm mindful that we have a lot of content there. We've got a dual question coming actually from Team G, Graham and Gerard. And it is, why are there so many kayak guides who move on to become expedition leaders? And what can we do within our ranks, to encourage guides from other backgrounds or focuses or, enthusiasms, such as our historians or our ornithologists, to pursue these roles? Solan, rumor has it you're pretty good in a kayak and started as a kayak guide. Why do you think we have a predominant kayak guiding EL transition?
Yeah, it's a fun question to piece apart. The first thing that comes to mind is that as a kayak guide, you are kind of a mini expedition leader in some senses, and that's in the sense that your skill set, your hard skill set, has to be really acute around the environmental conditions, kind of in a similar way that you want your acuity to be when you're an EL, watching, having that kind of spidey sense, that extrasensory sense about weather, wind, and clouds, and what the sea state's doing, and just how things work on a local level, and wanting that to be quite subtle, and needing it to be quite subtle in order to make quite grand calls sometimes about people's ultimate safety. So that's one thing that comes to mind. Another one is the communication element. So, I think of the process of presenting, and, so often and traditionally that's kind of a one-way process of communication. But when you're in a small group leadership setting, like you oftentimes find yourself when you're kayak guiding or in mountaineering or another such thing, there's much more attention on making sure that each guest, visitor, person has understood you clearly, and you can tell immediately if they haven't by their behavior. And so you get attuned to your own, let's call them flaws of communication, or your own, you see quite immediately how you have not been able to communicate yourself really clearly in those instances. And that is such a critical part of ELing, isn't it? We've all been approached by someone, after a briefing or after giving a briefing on a landing or something, and they ask you the question that you just told them the answer to, about something. And you realize yet again that communication is ultimately your responsibility. You know, whether or not they were distracted, of course, is beyond your control, but ultimately communication has to happen, and it's up to you. And I feel that that's something that when you're working independently on the water as a kayak guide, you're acutely aware and needing that element. And the last thing I'll say is just, particularly in our small cruise, expedition cruise industry, just having a sense for the sea in general, having a sense for water and ocean, shore landings, having a sense for improvisation kind of in the moment and fast flexibility, having a sense for the vulnerability of human beings in these incredible hostile environments. You feel that when you're in a kayak, you feel that vulnerability. And so there's this humility that I think comes with that type of guiding that bestows expedition leaders very well. Apologies for that long-winded answer.
Yeah, but I totally agree. I don't have your experience, but I definitely agree. And I think there's something else as well, and that maybe also touches on the theme of this webinar, is who wants to become an EL? Why? That's my question, actually. Why would you want to become an EL? And I have seen that a lot of people, like historians, and that's more my background, but all the other specialties that you're naming, those people like their specialty. They're into whales or birds or whatever, and that's what they like. That's why they're there. Whereas I think when you become an EL, and that's something that everybody who aspires that should be aware of, I think that you move away from your specialty. You have to become this organizer, logistic manager, team player, whatever, mediator. You have all these organizing skills that you need, but you go away a bit from your specialty, the thing that really makes you tick as well. Like I remember I had lots of lectures and I was reading all these books, whereas now I'm studying windy and I'm doing other stuff, which is equally important, but it's just different. And maybe that's where the Kayak Guide is also more of a generalist and organizing the activity. So how do you get the others into ELing? That's a big question. I have no idea.
Yeah, and we'll probably, or we will, I have a strong suspicion, touch a little bit more on some of the pathways that you all went through to become expedition leaders, because I know there's probably some, aspiring expedition leaders out there who are looking for the recipe a little bit. But while we stick with this here, Solan, you talked a lot about communication, and it's made me wonder, I mean, do you have to be an excellent public speaker to be an expedition leader? Do you need to be an extrovert? Is this something that's required? And we could probably dispel a few myths with this. Laurie, what's your experience on this?
Oh, I wish you could ask someone who had worked with me 8 years ago how that it works. I've been terrified of public speaking for a long time, and worked with a gracious team who was trying to encourage me to speak more. And like the first times I would take the microphone, it would be chipping off my teeth. I was so nervous, I was just shaking, and really felt I couldn't get my message across. So I used to joke that I really loved the organization and logistics, operationalizing stuff. That was where I felt most comfortable. And so I worked a lot as expedition coordinator. Someone asked me if I'd ever want to be an expedition leader. And I said, if I could do a Wizard of Oz version where I was behind the curtain and I never had to see anyone, then I'd be happy to do it. And so I find it is quite funny that I've transitioned into this role. But over time, we just, made it a priority to work on that public speaking. And I think it was easiest to start doing that with things that you're really comfortable with, or that you had more confidence in. I started doing, we have disembarkation briefings to tell people about plans for getting off the ship the next day. And as expedition coordinator, I would have known more about that process than any of the other team or any of the guests. And so getting up and starting to do that and just trying to find an avenue to have more face time. And a little bit of tequila the first couple times helped as well.
Yeah. Well, I can assure you that even as somebody who is comfortable speaking in others, I definitely had a beer or so before my first Guides and Sides webinar last year. It was something that I need a little bit of a prop up here. Not so appropriate now, it's 6:30 in the morning in New Zealand.
Can I add something to that? I think at some point I was terrified, like you, Laurie. I was just, I was sweating when I was holding the microphone and everything. I was thinking, oh my gosh, am I doing this? But sometimes it's nice to push your boundaries a bit. But I think in a sense, you need to enjoy it as well. You can learn a lot of things, but if you really don't enjoy it, and if you really do not enjoy communication and people, then I think it becomes a problem. So public speaking, yeah, of course you can do it, but if it's just sending and not making connection with people, then I think it's not going to work, even though you can speak. So there's another element to it that I think is really important.
Yeah, that's a great point, Flo. And even when I think of the briefings that I was most comfortable giving, it was because I was trying to figure out the best way to get messages across, and seeing that people were, often scared and confused for some reason when it's time to leave the ship. And so trying to, provide that comfort for people and guidance. And then, so I think being at the forefront of leading is communication and care for people and trying to get a message across. So yes, holding a microphone and standing in front of an audience is a different avenue for that, but the core of what you're doing there is still the same. So that's a great point to bring up.
So we've talked a lot on communication, obviously being a key skill for a good expedition leader, and I guess that's what we're talking about here. But what other skills do you think that expedition leaders need to bring to the party with them? Solan, any thoughts on this?
Humility is huge, and by that I mean, connected with accountability. I mean, gosh, we all just make mistakes all the time, and I think it's kind of instinctual to try to avoid them and avoid being seen doing them and avoid, the immediate repercussions. And so you have to fight that instinct really hard as an EL, because as we've all pointed out here, there is so much transparency in the industry as well, and with our guests and clientele and with our team and so forth. So I just think, humility to yourself and to this incredibly complex job that you're doing, such that you can be transparent with the things you make. If it's a bad call, if it's just a mistake in a fact, if it's a moment where you're tired and impatient and snap at somebody or ignore something that you shouldn't, all those things really need to not be ignored. They just need to be explained and accounted for, and then moving on. And that's one of the biggest things too, I think, is a really humility as far as your ego is concerned, because to me, in that role, you're exposed to so much criticism as well as so much celebration that you kind of have to have, it's sort of like you're a lightning rod, and there's just all this energy coming through you. And so you really need to have a steady sense of being in order just to not let your head get too full, and also not let your heart get too beat up because you're leading with it. So yeah, those are my initial thoughts anyway. Humility and accountability.
Perfect. Laurie or Flo, any other skills that you think ELs should or could bring to the party?
Yeah, I'm still sort of soaking in Solan's last words there. That was very well said. I would think of like skills, and sometimes I think of the personality traits, and some people have those things innately, and so they're well suited to being an EL. I think of things like just a calm presence. If you've got a million things on the go around you, no one else needs to know that. You're dealing with a person in front of you, the zodiac or the group, or the people that are in your immediate presence. You'll find your mind going in a million different directions, but you have to be able to sort of manage that all. And so I think that calm presence is really key, that even and particularly if you're out in challenging conditions and things are getting hairier and you're getting people returning, and the last thing you want is, an EL speaking to you with raised voices or a more anxious tone that just heightens everyone's anxiety. So keeping calm in those moments, and patience is a big one.
So how do you do that, Laurie? How do you keep calm in those moments? Are there strategies that you employ?
That's a great question. I might come back to it. I can't think of anything offhand. It's generally trying to stay focused on what is directly in front of you, and that's kind of the thing that I tend to stick to. I guess trying to consciously keep my voice down. I guess that's something that I kind of do naturally, though. But I guess this is what I was trying to say earlier. There's things that I think people instinctively and naturally do, but I guess if that's not the way that you are and you want to work on it, it's little things like if you're getting people in and out of zodiacs, you can see someone getting anxious about it because you've said it a million times how to get in and out of a boat, but that person's only done it 1 or 2 times, or maybe even 10, but that's not much in a lifetime. So you're just having patience for people, and being okay with slowing things down a little bit. The patience comes in quite a bit with questions from staff and guests, much like getting in and out of a boat. You might have heard that question 100 times before, and it's the first time that person's ever asked, and so they deserve the attention that you would have given the person the first time you ever answered it. And that's easy in the first year, and 4 years in, it's you have to work at it, definitely. And I will think about strategies for that and let you know if I come up with it.
I think.
Go for it, Flo.
I think it's also important to be honest. One thing is, for example, when it's to passengers, sometimes you just can't take it anymore, and it's not their fault. It's just that too many things happen. Maybe that day you're tired. I don't know. What I try to do is ask somebody else to, for example, help people disembark from the Zodiac when you just get too annoyed with people. And we're only human. I think that's the other point. For example, when it's towards the team, I hate it when I lose patience, for example, for the team members, because they are most important to me. But I think it's important to be honest and to tell them, I'm sorry, I'm only human. I just lost it. That's it. And I think the open communication there is difficult, even if your intentions are good. There's so much pressure all the time. And I think, we just need to be able to tell them. And I think the team should be able to tell them, hold on, just relax a bit. Let's have a drink. We'll talk it over again. Not make it too big. I think lightness in all this, because so much going on when you're organizing for the team as well, just to organize light moments and to enjoy it and to have fun as well. I think that is so important.
Fantastic, Flo. Yeah, no, I mean, I guess it sounds like we've got some good discussions happening on Facebook. Lauren's keeping us updated with that. I certainly don't have the ability to multitask in 2 different platforms. I was thinking about the question I posed to you, Laurie, and certainly for me in an expedition role, in an EL's role, if I'm in a situation where I don't have a lot of a buffer, between where the level of comfort that I have and the level of kind of need and expectation, then I certainly engage the almighty pen and waterproof notebook, so for me, that's like a strategy I'll have so that I'm not missing things and that I can retain a bigger picture. And it's also, my mind's a little bit like a sieve, so I'll get an idea or something that needs to happen, but it's only there for the briefest of moments. And so I always have to write that stuff down so that I can come back and kind of revisit that because and I think you've talked about it, Flo, there's just so much going on in an expedition leader's role. I think if you're doing a good job, I mean, you can make it pretty easy by not doing much at all, but it's easy to get kind of buried in the minutiae. So Solan, coming back to you, we've got a question from Penilla about How do you personally keep your head steady? Like, what strategies do you use? How do you not get upset? Any hot tips or insights there from the Alaskan Zen master?
Yeah, a lot of throwing up before public speaking and insomnia. That was my previous life. It's such a good question. I think one thing that comes to mind about it is that as I view the EL role as being, because I've witnessed this. This is something that I feel like I've received through observing others very carefully, and that is that they have become, or we become, a kind of emotional anchor for everything in many ways, and that's where that steadiness comes in. It's sort of like, if it's getting really crazy, but you maintain steadiness, that just helps everything. It helps everything, including your own mind and decision-making abilities. So yeah, how to do that is, I really believe, is such a personal thing. However, acknowledging that our nervous systems are all sort of cued to respond urgently to urgent situations, I think there are a few kind of, universal techniques that work really well if people use them and are receptive to them. And I certainly have. And one of those is breathing. It sounds sort of silly, but when we're getting a little bit worked up, oftentimes our breath shortens, and it can sound kind of dramatic to do deep breathing around a bunch of people. So maybe you do need to take some steps away. But that's a really important thing to remember, even if it only makes you take a few steps away from the circumstance, and just to like separate for a moment, lay down a quick boundary about what's happening. I'm going to take 2 minutes to clear my head over here and grab the pen and waterproof notebook, and breathing. Another feature that I learned from somebody else was, he described it as polar Tai Chi. And it's this sort of sense that the energy coming at you should not linger in you. It should move through you elsewhere, And so I think about that with, people's frustrations or with emergencies. The emergent energy is just moving through me elsewhere, and it's my job to just help direct it into this, more calm, steady decision-making kind of mode. So I think of the polar Tai Chi, and I think breath.
Right on. The dude abides, polar Tai Chi. I like that one. I'll take that forward with me. Thanks for those insights, team. We've talked a little bit about kind of preparation, and we've got a question come through, and it ties in with the, a wise person once said, proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. So what are your strategies like when you're coming into a season, hopefully, like we might be this coming Antarctic season? What are some strategies that you'll be employing as an expedition leader before you get on the ship, before you begin your contract, or before you're, in front of people? Are there things that you do to kind of dial yourself in and get in the zone, so to speak? And it doesn't have to be Antarctic related. It could be Arctic or anywhere in between. Flo, anything you do in particular to prepare yourself for a season or a contract?
Sleep, maybe, because I know I won't do that a lot while on board. No, but I think my first thing is always, I want to know who's on the team. And I work for Ponar and Aurora Expeditions and Ocean White. And so there's all different teams, and I want to know who's on and get in touch with them and set the scene a bit and start to create something together, even though we're not there. And I think the looking forward bit is huge, especially now after, all this time that we're not on the ships and we all miss each other in these regions. I can't wait to start preparing again. And then, so this is more the team thing to start that. And of course, you're going to see who has what specialty. If you've got lectures about all things, just the new people, brief them a bit about how it all works. But to get the team thing already going before you go there. And then, of course, there's the obvious stuff. Just do your IATO test or IACO test. We all do that. And Yeah, I think also just get back into it, look at the landing sites, if there's anything new. But then again, we do that probably all year round, that if there's a bit of a piece of ice breaks off somewhere, we all know it. But yeah, that's the knowledge side, I think, that I used to prepare. But I really like the team thing, starting with that.
Cool. I'll come back to that in just a moment. Flo, Laurie, is there anything you're doing in particular?
No, it's funny. I wish I had some great advice to give people here, but I think, in all honesty, especially having worked, I typically work pretty long seasons, and then the time off in between is more about rest and recovery, and yeah, kind of just trying to get in the right mindset. So I think that when I first started yelling, I thought you have to prepare so much and be so ready for everything. But the reality is the nature of the job is dynamic, and there's so many things that you're just reacting to or trying to take advantage of, or jump on. And because of the dynamic nature of the work, I feel less need to be really prepared in advance. But I think that personal prep and care for yourself is really key. I like what Flo said about trying to connect with the team. I think that's something that's quite important. But I do notice that it's challenging. I don't know, Solan, if you've experienced the same thing, where if you work lots of trips back to back, you can start off with the team day one and talk about sort of your ethos and what you want to create on the team, and then you just continue to support that. And then so many people change over the next port day, and then so many people beyond that. And so that's something that I'm currently trying to work through, is how you continue to be as open with the full team by season end, when it's a completely different group, and but people are just rolling over. So that's not tips, that's more a question. Does anyone have a tip for me? How do I work through that?
Well, you're actually you're both speaking to a question that we've had in from John about, how do you integrate new team members in to your team mid-season? And I think that is one of the great challenges. Solan, do you have any thoughts or experience on trying to bring people into the team?
It's such a good question. It's such a hard question too, because oftentimes in the midst of the season, we're just, we're at full sprint, and in this, most of the areas we operate, I believe, and most of the operators, we don't have days off in between. So there's not this kind of time to, integrate a new team member outside of the actual working environment. So you're in the working environment for one. Certainly things like, making sure that, from your position as the leader, you designate someone that you trust and know will be a good communicator and a good embracer of a new person, and be like, okay, this new person is going to be your responsibility to, help with everything, and just kind of take under your wing and mentor a bit, and make sure that they have not just show up on time and know where to go and what to do. I mean, all that stuff happens kind of as a matter of training as well, but more, the softer stuff, like how are they doing just, in the being at sea for the first time perhaps, or, just with the softer stresses of the job. So I think having a designated buddy or mentor is a really important element. And also, it's so hard to find the time to kind of casually get to know everyone in the midst of the season. The times that I have been able to attempt to do that have been amazing, because, being able to have a rapport with someone who you're just beginning to work with is one of the most valuable things you can have, because that's one of the foundations of trust, is how you are just interpersonally together. Not that we all have to be friends by any means, but just as far as sharing our lives and the acknowledgement that we're in this together as one team. And so all of us need to be kind of on board with that approach together.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, Solan. And what I sometimes find is that it's difficult, because we need to interact with passengers. Then as an EL, you're running around all the time. There's always something to do, and there's very few moments where you can sit together just being relaxed together with a team. Because when you're, for example, I know some companies I work for, you're not supposed to be together as a team. You have to mingle all the time. So then maybe dinner could be a good thing, but then dinner, it's not possible because you're eating with guests. So I'm always trying, even if it's not maybe the company policy, to have a couple of times where at least, you just have off time together where people can really meet. And I think as an EL, it's even more important, and you don't have that time. And I really think that is a pity. That for me is a big difference. When you're a guide, you get to know your team. You're just working with all of them. You're sharing your cabin. And then as an EL, there is a bit of distance. And I feel I really have to make an effort to find the time and to invest it also in the team for just off work stuff. Just get to know each other and create this trust.
Yeah, I think you've all touched on some really valid points there. In the Antarctic, I'm working for Antarctica 21, so we're on a 6-day turnaround, so we don't even get a port day to kind of stop and breathe and kind of channel your inner Zen master. And we do have, historically, we've rolled through, and have quite a team turnover. And I worked with Shelley Larson in the capacity of kind of like, being her assistant. I think it was last season or season previous. And if anyone's worked with Shelley, she's an amazing and an experienced woman to work with. And something I really liked she did, so I took it and made it my own, as you do with creative plagiarism, is her onboarding process. And we actually ended up writing it into our SOPs for the company a little bit more. So formalizing the mentoring system, making sure that you're actually being mindful about who they're going to, which cabin they're going to be joining, because we still encourage that, making sure people don't disappear off into single cabins forever. And then for me as an EL, it was trying to sit down with them in the kind of first 48 hours on board, because I think, like you mentioned, Solan, like the nuts and bolts happen. But I think you mentioned it, Laurie, like the team ethos that, and when you start with a team pre-season, that you'll have the opportunity to talk about the team ethos, etc. But that gets lost in translation as you roll into full sprint mode. And so certainly for me, and what I've been mindful of, and what I learned from Shelley was, just sitting down and having a meal with the new staff and just bringing them up to speed on the philosophy of, your particular approach to EL, or, what the team has been focusing on. So that's definitely kind of a hot tip that I've picked up with that. We've got a really valid question come through. And this ties into what you've all been talking about. How are you approaching, or how can you approach being, an expedition leader of a team, but also being friends with the people in the team, and how do you strike a balance there? Because it can be difficult, because at the end of the day, your job is to lead. Is there anything that you're mindful of as you come through with that?
I don't think that is necessarily very difficult, to be honest, because to me, it's really teamwork. I don't feel that I have different responsibilities, but I'm not really different in the team. So for me to be friends, and also afterwards in my role, I have also maybe some other things to do if people make mistakes, to let them know in an empowering way. But I don't see that as a problem. That is a work thing and not a personal thing. As long as you don't mix those two, I don't find that really difficult, to be honest.
So excuse me, how do you not mix the two there?
But they are mixed. They are mixed, but I think the work thing, like if I have something to say about how somebody, if I see something and I think it should be mentioned to that person, then I'll do that. It's just a work thing, but it has nothing to do with whether I appreciate that person or not. As a person, I don't know, for me that is quite easy to, I think it's the same in a normal job, isn't it? You're having a coffee with your colleague and then there's things that you like or don't like or whatever. Yeah, I don't necessarily find that difficult. But maybe I'm not getting the question right. So maybe you guys want to answer to this.
No, I understand what you're saying, because I feel the same. I think that I think perhaps approach the role in the same way, trying to have strong communication with your team and a foundation of trust and respect. And so if you are approaching everything with that mutual respect, if there's something that you've got to not necessarily correct, or something's happened that you want to address, coming at that from a place of not non-judgment, but an understanding, and saying, this is like, I want to know why this was that this happened, and can we talk through it and ensure that doesn't happen again, or being open to someone doing something differently, finding out why and saying, actually, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe that's something that I'll incorporate. And so I think that openness and trust has to be at the basis of everything. And so I've been fortunate to feel that is the case in most teams that I've worked with. I don't know if anyone has been on my teams that's watching this that disagrees, then don't type that in Facebook. But no, I think that's the basis of it. And that's the basis of friendship as well. So if combining colleagues and friendship is, I think, pretty manageable in that way, with that foundation of trust and respect. I've said that a lot. Solan, moving on to you.
Yeah, I could certainly echo all those sentiments as well. And to add a challenge that I face sometimes, that perhaps we all have, is when there is some kind of a grievance, or you've witnessed someone who who's a friend who you respect as well, but who's done something that's outside of the lines of what's appropriate in some circumstance, and you need to take it up with them. And sometimes when you do have a history of friendship, that can be much easier. And sometimes when you have a history of friendship, that can be much more difficult. And, not to spin us in circles here, but to me, the lesson is just, to approach the kind of, not that someone's being punished, but to approach that circumstance, that moment, just directly and cleanly and as immediately as possible, whether they're friends or not. I've experienced that to my own detriment, and struggled with sometimes confrontation with people who are friends, who are maybe even my mentors at different points in time, who I'm now finding myself in disagreement with about our conduct. And so it felt acute in those moments, but now looking back, I know that, inevitably, the best approach is always, immediate and clear communication around those things. And then, we're all adults, and at the end of the day, we have to have room to disagree as well. And sometimes that will be the outcome of those circumstances. I think I'll say lastly, I suffer from wanting everyone to get along. And when they don't, I can't help but feel a little bit responsible, even though it's totally outside of my control in many, many circumstances. It's totally fine for people not all to get along and not all to be friends. But I think I have this ideal dream that the teams that I work on and work with and work for will be kind of one big strange community of, polar guides, because there is just so much bizarreness that we all bring to this stage. And when that's not the case, I feel like it's my responsibility sometimes, and I know that it's not, and I just need to let it go sometimes as well. You do what you can to create a sense of community and camaraderie, and also let it go.
Some excellent stuff in there, team. Thanks for all of those insights. I can certainly empathise with what you're talking about there, Solan. I always try and achieve 100% harmony, which is delusional, and can be time-consuming. But it is nice when it happens. What I'm keen to do is explore a little bit more of your pathways to becoming expedition leaders, and I guess the questions that will follow on that I have in mind is trying to map out some sort of a pathway, or certainly an approach for folk out there who are aspiring expedition leaders. Maybe they're in an assistant expedition leader role, or what I'd call a cruise manager role, or perhaps they're a part of the team and they're looking at moving up. So what I'm curious just to hear very briefly about, what was your pathway to becoming an EL and to break the kayak mold here. Flo, do you want to tell us your journey from historian to expedition leader? How did that work out?
I don't know. It happened. I think I started at Port LaCroix as space leader there. That's where I met a lot of people. And then I became a guide on ships and on a yacht, crewed on a yacht. And I liked the guiding, but then at some point somebody said you should be an AEL and maybe you could be an EL. But I had no ambition whatsoever to do that. I mean, I liked what I was doing, but then the AEL role brought me closer to the EL role. And I don't know, at some point it just happened and I was terrified. I was really thinking, my gosh, is this what I want? And I think it would be really my advice for anybody who's thinking, would I like to become an EL? I think you have to ask yourself, do you really want it? What is it that brings you down there? And I'm not saying it's not nice, because to my own surprise, I loved it. So that was the other discovery. I was absolutely surprised that I liked it, because I have no ambition to be a leader, or I don't have this ego thing that I need that or whatever. But I feel that what brings me there is that I love these regions and I love people, and I can just, in my role, I can do that. And I think I can organize, but then again, sorry guys who are watching me who don't agree. But so I think it feels, to be honest, when I did it, I felt like I had wings, and I didn't expect that at all. But it was, I was asked, and it happened. Yeah, and I'm very thankful for that.
Fantastic. There's a slogan in there, isn't there? Like, ELing gives you wings, but that might be a bit close to an Austrian company. Laurie, what was your journey to ELing? And can you confirm nor deny? I've heard a rumor that you're going to EL the ultramarine. Is this something you can confirm nor deny?
I believe I can confirm. Yes.
Wow, that's pretty neat. Can you tell us about your journey?
It started off just as a general guide who had a lot to learn. And when I had the short 3-month stint, I was often popping into the office and seeing if there was things that I could help with. And somehow then the next season I was back as an expedition coordinator. And I think sometimes the terms are mixed up between the different ships. So I think expedition coordinator with Quark is probably a lot like AEL or cruise manager for other ships. So you're working on the onboard programming and facilitator for team events and meetings and things. And so I really enjoyed that operational side, something that my previous work had been involved in. And as I've mentioned before, I didn't really see being at the head of a team and in front of an audience. And I was kind of happy with where I was for a while. I enjoyed being able to coordinate things and plan things. I always wanted to be a little bit more on the logistics side. But I guess eventually was other people. I was fortunate enough that other people saw leadership qualities in myself before I saw it in myself. And so I was asked to lead, and I was fortunately asked to lead 2 trips, and I said yes. And then I realized that I had been asked to be an expedition leader, and that sounds really stupid, but I hadn't connected that it was going to be a shift from that point forward into leading. And I think had I had that question, it might have been a harder one to answer, but because it was this tangible 2-trip period, which then went on to be much, much more. So I think one thing that I was grateful for was I was offered different positions at different times. So coordinator and assistant expedition leader. I worked a season in the gift shop with Quark, and didn't ever want to turn an opportunity down. And I'm really glad that I did, because it gave me insight into the different roles that people are fulfilling and the other responsibilities for team members. So when you're now, responsible for being at sort of the top of the team, if you will, you have a good understanding of those different roles. So I think being open to change and shifting your role is a good thing to keep in mind for people if they think they want to lead. Being aware of all the different facets, all the things that people have to add to that team is pretty key.
Fantastic. Solan from Alaska.
Gosh, and there are just so many ways to come at this role, because it demands so many different sorts of things from a person that there's definitely no mold, as you can hear here with us too. But yeah, I started in small group kayak guiding here in Alaska. We'd go out for 3 days to a week at a time, and we'd be camping in wilderness settings. And in that context, you're kind of doing everything. I remember feeling like, okay, well, I'm the cook, and I'm the navigator, and I'm the logistics, and I'm figuring out all of our safety elements, and our brown bear issues and black bear issues around here, and communicating, and you're the psychologist when people are sad, all these things. And so when I began working on larger teams in the polar regions and saw the expedition leader role, it was not an ambition, but there are elements of it that felt familiar, I think, for that reason, for just how dynamic I saw it occurring and how many different things that were being juggled in that role. And then for me, I think one of the big turning points was working with expedition leaders who I saw just be incredibly inspiring to me and to the people that they were working with and for. And by inspiring, I mean kind of this nexus between empowering and pushing. You're kind of helping your team take their own next steps. Sort of mentoring, but also leading at the same time, and creating rapport, and that's what made me think that it was something that a challenge that I was just receptive to, I think, as well. But also, I think like both Flo and Laurie have mentioned, not something that I dreamed of wanting. It just seemed like a lot of work, and I really just wanted to be out in the field with my colleagues and so forth. So I agree. For someone aspiring to that position, especially if you recognize in yourself this aspiration, it's really important to reflect on that, because the position will certainly test all of your weakest spots, and the exposure to, again, just the exposure to constant feedback and constant criticism is just part of the feature of the job. And so I think that kind of self-steadiness, or being ready to move constantly, be tested in your steadiness, is a really, really key element if you're interested in pursuing that. Lots more to say about different pathways in, but I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Solan, were you kind of shoulder tapped? Were you asked to be EL? Was that the pivotal point for you?
It was the pivotal point, and when I was asked, I respectfully declined, not out of any kind of ego or whatever, not out of it was really out of fear, to be perfectly honest. I was just terrified of all that public speaking and all that responsibility, and really loved my job. And at a certain point, that shifted for me, and I think it was when I was just more receptive to, feedback in my own growth, I guess, just recognizing the challenges at hand in that role were going to test me in a way that I was curious about, and felt like, okay, I can at least stand up to this and not be just like bulldozed over by everything I was seeing. And, there's just so many people that I feel like I need to acknowledge personally that helped me along that journey, because like you said, Ben, with Shelley Larson, you take something from all of these leaders. And I think that's one of the critical pieces of being an aspiring expedition leader, or even if you're not aspiring, what may lead you there anyways, as it did for us, is this receptivity to and like listening and acute observation, and just being aware and alert to all of the ways that that role is being conducted, And so I think of people like, Laurie Dexter, Haley Shepard was an early EL for me, and was just like such a strong leader and female role model on our teams early on as well. And Brandon Harvey and Mariano Cruel and Woody and Allison Kirk-Lauritsen. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Alex McNeil and Ben, looking forward to working for you someday. Flo, maybe someday. I mean, it's just like when you think about just the potential for how much you learn working with other leaders as well, it becomes extremely exciting. So I'll leave my last comment just about this moment will be, to be a good leader, you need to be just as good, if not better, supporter. And going back and forth between those constantly in your role certainly does happen, but those are critical pieces.
Fantastic, Solan. Just keeping an eye on the clock here. We'll try and wedge out a few more little hot tips or nuggets of good information as we move forward, and I think we'll do a few questions before we wrap up. But I'm curious to hear, what was the best or a better piece of advice each of you received once you had, taken the step off the precipice to become an expedition leader? Are there any kind of poignant kind of pieces of information that were handed down to you, or was there something that stuck in your mind? Flo, is there anything once you decided to EL that really worked for you?
Yeah, I think it's so nicely said, Solan, how you talk about it. I absolutely recognize all of what you're saying. I admired some of the expedition leaders I worked with, and I wasn't thinking of becoming one. So I would just sort of admire how they did that. And then when I was asked to do it, and I accepted, I noticed that you take a bit of whatever you like, but in the end, and that was the advice that was given to me, is that you have to find your own style, which was again scary. Like, you're already doing this and then you have to find your own style. Yeah, I don't know what that is, but it's a bit of all those things. And then you make it into something, and I don't know, a next generation maybe takes things from me or from you guys. But I think that was really good advice, and also just a confidence, because Lauren asked the question as well, would you have become an EL if you hadn't been asked? I don't think so, but at some point I did notice that being on stage that something happened. So then when they asked, I had the guts to do it. Now I lost my track. I wanted to say something else, but the other thing is, the other good advice, I think, as an EL, you're so visible all the time that it is really important to step back as much as you can and let the team shine. And I totally agree with that, because even if you don't want to be visible as an EL, you are all the time. But yeah, I think it's really, really important to let the team shine.
Laurie, any sage advice for you?
I worked with Solan a lot, so you can imagine there would be lots of sage advice and wisdom coming from him. But actually, it wouldn't have even been a piece of advice. I don't even know if I'll remember it now. But I asked him at one point how he dealt with the fatigue. I see him working late at night and then being up first thing to make announcements and plan for the day, and like, isn't that exhausting? Or how do you? I think I said, like, how do you face the next day or something along those lines? And he's like, well, I just wake up to my alarm and instinctually go. And it really made me laugh, and it kind of reminds me of, like, it connects to this conversation. I think you just are exposed to the fact that the EL isn't perfect. They're not the expert in all facets of the role. They have anxieties, and it's just managing those and not feeling like you have to be perfect to be an EL. There's no person out there that is perfect. So taking away some of those misconceptions and understanding that you'll bring your own flaws to the role, and that if you know what those are and you can work through them, I think that's really important, as we've touched upon with public speaking earlier. But I don't know if that was so much advice or just a comment, but it really stuck with me, and it made me feel more comfortable moving into a leadership role. And I kind of hope that this conversation shed some light on that for people as well, that you realize that, yeah, every one of us has different anxieties or fears at different times, and yet we continue to do it. So obviously there's something we love about it, and want to see other people getting that same opportunity to be responsible for the team. One of the best things is getting to sort of shape the arc of a journey and shape people's experiences, and that's what I've been most keen to do. And you see the reward of doing that for guests and for your team too. And there's no better feeling when that goes right.
Hear, hear. I remember a piece of, I guess it could be called advice, but once you do the role, I think you kind of realize that advice is sort of irrelevant in some ways. It's sort of like, if you're in the field and you need some backup, give me a shout and then we can discuss whatever you're thinking about. But really, I think the biggest things that I received coming into the role of EL that were most critical for me was just encouragement and confidence from those who are around me. Like having other ELs just say, "You got this. Trust yourself." Having the company I was working for say, "We have full confidence in the calls that you're going to make out there. Let us know what we can do to help support you." And just having that sense of apparatus, this like deep sense of encouragement and confidence from those who are around me certainly was the biggest feature. So I give that out too, because not that it's cheerleading, because that feels hollow sometimes, but when you work with somebody and you see them and what they do, and you can give them a piece of feedback that's going to help encourage their growth forward, I just think that's so critical to give. And I need to acknowledge Graham Charles here for a moment, who gave me a couple of those moments at different points in time early in my career as well, who, it's just, I think that sort of thing is so important for us to remember that we're all here supporting each other. And that's not just logistically, but that's also emotionally as well.
Yep, no, I can echo what you've all said there. And then also, when I was looking at making the transition from Kayak Guides and Zodiac Driver to Expedition Leader, I certainly reached out to a few folk, and such as Mariano Curiel and also Graham Charles. And probably a bit of information that stuck with me from Graham was, if you look after your team, they'll look after everything else. So if you can be a good leader to your team and keep them, happy and challenged and in a good place, then they'll do what needs to be done to, run bodaciously good trips and things like that. And then listening to all of you talk here, it's just made me think about aspirant expedition leaders out there. And I think, a trap could be, because, I look at a star-studded cast in front of me, and I think trying to look through the lens or the eyes of an aspiring expedition leader, like it doesn't feel attainable to kind of try and emulate what you're all delivering, in your particular roles. And I think that can be kind of discouraging or feel unattainable for people. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, when you start to expedition lead, you just need to be good enough. That's all you need to be, and then you can work on being awesome and sage-like and becoming your little polar Buddha or whatever you were referencing earlier, Solan. But certainly you just need to be good enough to start. And it feels like pretty much every company has a good support network and a good team around. And so when you trip and when you fall, then they'll be there to kind of get you back on your feet, dust you off, and off you go again. So
Can I add to that, Ben?
Of
That
course.
I think also that last year there was the Field Staff Conference in the US. And for me, it was the first time I was there. And there were so many expedition leaders. And I thought it was really, really interesting and great and a big support to be there and talk honestly about things that mattered. You know, we were talking about problems when things go wrong. Nobody wants to talk about it. And of course they go wrong. We're only human. We make wrong decisions. Shit happens. And I don't know, somehow I wish that, like we're talking here, we're just exchanging that we could do that more often somewhere, somehow, and learn from each other also, you know, through all those companies. So thanks PTGA also for organizing this, because I hope it's inspiring for others, but I find it also very inspiring to be able to talk to you and to hear what you're saying. That's really nice. So thanks, Laurie and Solan as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And we are starting to come to a natural end here. But I just want to focus on, we've got one final question that we've come in, and it does throw our minds forward a little here, from Cecile, I believe. Apologies if I'm saying that incorrect. But the question is, you know, are you concerned about the conditions, or I guess the currency of our expedition teams once we resume, when we resume, because it will happen. You know, we've potentially lost some kind of key cornerstone members to, I think they call them steady jobs and things like that. So do you have concerns about currency with teams as we come back in, and, you know, or are the companies that you're involved with thinking ahead and looking to mitigate this? Laurie, what's happening behind the scenes for Quark?
I feel very grateful to work for a company that I think has a lot of staff that are contract for the company, and they care a lot about communicating regularly with that group. And so there's been quite a few long email updates to let us know what's going on, not just for our company, but globally, or in particular areas or gateway cities and that sort of thing. So I feel fortunate to work for a company that is keeping us connected in that way, and sometimes having Zoom calls, and I'm sure people are doing that independently anyway, but staying in touch with other field staff and colleagues. And it's amazing how distant the polar region can feel, and then you get chatting with someone, you look through some photographs, and you're right back there. So I think that's a really important part of it, is to just keep that connection together. I think that there will be some dusting off as we get back there. There might be some people that have been driving a boat for 10 years, and in that case it's just like getting up on a bike, and you'll carry on. And for others, they might have just started, and we're just starting to drive their own cruises, and then they take a couple of years off before going back. So for all of those people, the hope is that they find an opportunity or some way of getting out and staying trained up, and not letting those skills disappear, because you do have to continue to work on those skills. We've been working on a training program at Quark, and it seems like every time you've got a pathway, it's going to shift. We were using the Port of Ushuaia, and now it might be back on a ship, but it's something that the company is very much aware of and thinking about, is, how do we support staff in returning to the ships and delivering trips at the level that they were when it's been a little while. So I think that's just going to be a conscious effort on all our parts, and it'll be something that I'm trying to work on for myself. The first time I get up and take the mic on that trip will probably feel really different, because it's been so long. So being forgiving to ourselves and aware that we're all, in that shared experience.
Flo, what about you? You've mentioned a few other companies aside from Quark. Are things in place, or do you have any concerns about getting back on board the ships and currency with staff?
I think there's two things. I think there's just people that are financially struggling, so they're getting other jobs, and that's normal. I mean, gosh, it's been so long, and maybe they choose another path, and that's fine. But it's true that also that I think commercially there will be some pressure when we all start again, and I just hope that it will be safe. That there's not going to be too many new people, but that safety for the companies is still a big issue. And on the other hand, the other thing is, I think that once we start again, those that are coming back, I think we're all like little kids in a candy shop. I think we'll all be so happy to see each other again, to see the region again, and to start again. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I have a bit of a quality safety worry, and I hope that that won't be a problem. But I've no idea.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard rumor that the Expedition Guide Academy has a Zodiac ready to go in Europe. Little plug there.
I want to say something about how important training is going to be in the future. So, Ben, this one is for you.
I couldn't agree more.
Sorry, Solan.
Surprised the price point isn't flashing at the bottom of the screen right now, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's taken me a couple of years to even build up the courage to put in a little self-promotion. Any final thoughts or words, team? Or are you just happy to go and be able to go to the bathroom after in almost 2 hours? Laurie?
Yeah, sorry, we should let people go. But I guess just recognizing that, with the title of this talk, there's probably lots of people that are considering being EL. And so, yeah, there's folks out there that maybe never want to think about it, and they may still be shoulder tapped for your genuine leadership skills, and you might move up through the ranks. But if it's something that you're aware of and that you'd like to pursue yourself, I think vocalizing that, even if it's either to your EL at the time or somebody within the company or even a fellow colleague, but voicing that so that people are aware and can help you maybe take on more responsibility. And recognizing all the ways that you can show leadership in a team without taking on the title of EL. It's supporting new staff coming in, being a mentor to other team members. If you have a difference in opinion about an operation, it's, having the confidence to go and speak to the EL about that and talk it through or understand how they came to those decisions. I think that there's lots of times that staff might not know what's happening for what reason, or not agreeing with maybe a site choice or what's happening. And I think if you take the time to sit down and ask the EL, then they'll likely want to reciprocate that and let you know where they're coming at if they haven't already done so. But you can learn a lot from that. So there's lots of times that we make decisions that maybe aren't our ultimate one, but we're balancing lots of different aspects to come to that final plan. And so once you start thinking that way, instead of just judging, if you will, coming at it from a critical eye, but being open to understanding what's going on to lead to that decision. And not just wondering, if that makes sense. I think there can be a tendency to see it from one angle only. And I think as you start to see things with a bit of a bigger picture and look at all the different aspects of an operation, you'll be far better off down the line as an EL.
Awesome, Laurie. Solan.
So hard to wrap up after such a wonderful conversation. Thank you guys for the opportunity to reflect on all this. I think really reflecting on why we do what we do, whether we're in leadership positions or, and we all are at one point or another as guides, and reflecting on that and having a sense for that is really important. Just in your own individual sense of carrying on through the adverse conditions and variety of things that we face between fatigue and exhaustion and so forth. So I think examining the why for yourself is a good thing to do, even if it's not quite clear. Sometimes it's very difficult to describe. So that's one final thought. And another one is just, you cannot possibly overestimate the importance and power of listening and observing carefully. And one thing I learned early on as an EL was that my questions showed the extent of my knowledge. So for example, if I asked a captain about something and he laughed in my face, I knew that what I asked was probably pretty stupid. I mean, that's a silly, it only happened a couple of times, I swear. But it certainly is an example of that point. So it's important, as you're perhaps aspiring to be an expedition leader and thinking about asking questions about why did you choose this, why did you choose that. Also, it's important to remember that you're not necessarily just entitled to all of this knowledge, because you also need to do the work to provide a base of understanding about why that might be the case, and a base of understanding around this immense apparatus of organization that's involved, especially in places like the Antarctic Peninsula. So, oftentimes the question, okay, Laurie, why did you land here today, would be a half-day answer if you really wanted to get into the details of it. And so listening and observing and having a consciousness for the big picture.
Are you going to ask me now, Ben?
Yeah, just follow on casually from that there, Flo.
I'll be very brief, because it's brilliant what you guys are saying. I really don't know too well what to add to it, except that what I said earlier, that I feel privileged that I was asked to become an expedition leader, and maybe stupid enough to say yes, but that I really appreciate it. I think that anybody who's just interested in, or thinks that they might want to do it, like Laurie said, just express it. And believe in yourself, and it is an amazing job as well. It's tough, but there's a lot to discover for yourself. I think that I've done a lot of management jobs before I did this sort of work, but I have learned so much, and about myself, about people. And I think it has made me a richer person. So despite the fact that there's a lot of stuff going on when you're an EL, it's also an amazing job. So I would, if people feel just the tiniest bit of interest in doing it, just express it and push your boundaries. Maybe you can do it, and you can become a richer person.
Fantastic. Hey, thank you so much to the three of you for taking time and a lot of energy and forethought, actually, because that's the reality of what goes into these webinars. So thank you so much for all of your insights and inputs and thoughts, and hopefully the people at large on Facebook world have found this beneficial and perhaps thought-provoking, and encouraged to go out there and just have a crack. I mean, some would say if you can dream it, you can do it. Now, special thanks to the Polar Tourism Guides Association for doing the mahi, the hard work behind the system here to make it all happen. So thanks to Graham and Colby and the team, and then big thanks to Lauren, who is the glue that binds. So she's the woman who makes it all happen, who's hidden behind the screen here. So thanks a lot to her as well.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Ben, as well.
Thank you very much. Yep. It's been my pleasure, and I feel fortunate to sit in a virtual room with the three of you. Hopefully we'll get to do it sometime in the near future. And just to kind of look ahead, because we like to do that in life, anticipation is key. Next week, we have a presentation by a bunch of supremely local folk in Svalbard, and the presentation this next Tuesday is a guide's eye view to Svalbard in transition. So for those of us who have bipolar habits, then that will be very, very interesting as well. So without further ado, thank you very much for tuning in from around the world. And we hope that you're all in a good place and are feeling confident and happy about where things are at. And hopefully we get to see you all in a port sometime soon. Other than that, ciao. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks.
Very well.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you for your attention.